What's happening, folks? It's your boy, Jack Slack, broadcasting to you from a rock in the middle of a thunderstorm. And it's the Fights Gone By podcast. And we're on the cusp of something of a great event. I say something of a great event, kind of an odd event, but lots of name power on the event. Some good fights, Ben Askren versus Masvidal, lots of questions around that one. Rockhold versus Błachowicz. We get to see how Rockhold's chin holds up at light heavyweight. Chiesa versus Sanchez. Gilbert Melendez comes back against Arnold Allen. Marlon. Yeah, you got lots of good stuff on there. And then you've got two big names, John Jones and Amanda Nunes, who they keep pushing as the pound-for-pound woman and pound-for-pound man in the world or something like that. Hoping to get them together to have a baby. But they're both fighting, well, what some people are considering no-hopers. I mean, I give Holm probably a better chance than Santos, even though he's got the one-punch power, but we'll get onto that in a minute. Anyway, strange event. And on the subject of strange events, we got some news. Doesn't get much stranger than the UFC cutting John Lineker. Lineker, obviously, always a top guy in the world at whatever weight he's being forced to fight. Just came off that great fight with Corey Sandhagen, where he lost, but he looked very, very good. Looked a lot sharper than I expected. As I said when we talked about that fight, was making Sandhagen come to him, making him step in and give up his reach and then swinging back with counters. Showed some nice takedowns in that fight, almost guillotined him. Very much a force wherever he fights. Problem is, he's unreliable as fuck. He was complaining that UFC matchmakers don't do enough for him, and then they gave him another matchup, and he just pulled out of that. And if you look back at his record now, there's been in his last 6 bookings, he's pulled out of 4. And then there's all this speculation over the reason he pulled out of the last one. I suspect, as Scott Steiner put it, he's fat! He probably was on the way to miss weight and cited an injury and pulled out or something like that, and the UFC were probably sick of it and cut him, which they can probably do because he was coming off a loss. Or they agreed that he's going to go his own way. At any rate, there's some interesting fights out there for him now. How about John Lineker versus Koji Horiguchi? Anyone? John Lineker versus Demetrius Johnson. John Lineker in 1. John Lineker in Rising. John Lineker in Bellator. Isn't Bellator about to start their Bantamweight Grand Prix? Or it might have been a Featherweight Grand Prix. At any rate, get John Lineker over there. He'd probably fight at Featherweight. He fought Michael McDonald back in the day, and he was dwarfed by him. Bare-knuckle FC, or is it Bare-knuckle FC? Whoever, the company behind the genius of Paulie Malignaggi versus Artem Lobov, announced that they did over 200,000 pay-per-view buys, and sites promptly ran this saying Bare-knuckle FC does more pay-per-view buys than the UFC, or gets more views than the UFC or whatever. The UFC's last pay-per-view was behind the ESPN Plus pay, so you had to buy ESPN Plus and then buy the pay-per-view through that, I believe. So they were expecting to drain a ton of pay-per-view buys that way. But firstly, why would you believe these people? Bare-knuckle FC managed to wrangle it so that Florida, a state where they release payouts for fighters, they asked them nicely and they refused to hand out the payouts. So, as I was saying before this fight, two things were guaranteed. Paulie Malignaggi is going to break a hand and someone is going to end up in a payment dispute. It's looking like that's going to happen, or at least there's some shadiness going on. And then they're going to tell you that they've got 200,000 pay-per-view buys. And then Dave Meltzer, who is obviously connected to people in the pay-per-view business, popped up and said, nah, it's probably about a tenth of that. So, 200,000 pay-per-view buys, still better than Glory Last Man Standing, but pretty hilarious that people believed that. Not much matchup news this week. Couple in the female divisions. We got, said female, sound like an incel. Females, femoids. A couple in the women's divisions. We got Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Michelle Waterson for October 12th. Only verbally agreed, but that's a strange fight. We got the sense they wanted to push Michelle Waterson. There was talk about giving her Andrade. That was shortly after she'd appeared on the Joe Rogan show and got the push, the bump. And promptly that was laughed out of the conversation, and Dana White had to backtrack that. But yeah, they're putting in Jędrzejczyk. Big step up for Waterson because she's not fought anyone anywhere near as good as Jędrzejczyk. She fought Rose Namajunas and got smoked. But Jędrzejczyk, we don't know how much of her recent run has been a decline. It could be that she's just having a physical or reaction, a physical decline in like reactions and things like that, or a decline in confidence. At any rate, she seems less intensely focused on things. Got herself a big fake pair of boobs, which we all appreciate, but yeah, she seems like someone who's sort of winding down her fighting career. So maybe Michelle Waterson does her. Michelle Waterson, very game and surprisingly good wrestling against people who outsize her by a significant amount. Because if you remember, Michelle Waterson was the best atomweight in the world at one point, and then the UFC opened up a strawweight division. And she said, "Oh, okay, I'll fight 10 pounds up and just lose because I'll get money at least." Whereas, I'm not going to make that money in Invicta. She could go to Ryzen and have a boring fight with Jinyu Frey or Canna Thingy. And then Joanne Calderwood versus Andrea Lee is signed, which is a good one because they're both sort of longer kickboxers, both good clinch strikers. So that could be a lot of fun with them kneeing the shit out of each other. What else happened? Diego Sanchez did this absolutely insane interview where he cut basically a 17-minute pro wrestling promo. I watched about 5 minutes of it because, I appreciated it. I thought he was funny. I thought there was some... it's one of those things where you're like, is this guy being witty? Is this part... it was like Tony Ferguson when they gave him... After the Conor versus Khabib madness post-fight, they basically let Tony Ferguson go out at the press conference and just rap for half an hour. And he's just saying the most hilarious, ridiculous things. And then later you realise, okay, no, it's not actually an act at all. He's genuinely going through the throes of paranoia and a mental breakdown. And this is kind of how I feel about the Diego Sanchez thing. I don't want to laugh at the things that he says because, he might be in a very bad place. I think, were they saying that he's had some trouble with, like, he's had a divorce or something like that, and he's fallen out with the trainers that he's been with for years. Do they have anyone there now? They've got Holly Holm and John Jones, and that's about it down at Wax and Jink, Jackson Wink. But yeah, Diego's in a strange place. And then the other thing is that people are just coming out and going like, oh, he's just weird. He's always been weird. And you're going, no, he was weird, but here he was slurring his fucking words. And he has in like every recent interview, but he wasn't back on The Ultimate Fighter. The dude has been hit in the head so much and in very, he doesn't have defense. He's been in a lot of fights and he's been hit a lot. And that doesn't happen without you experiencing some kind of damage. Whether you show symptoms of things like CTE is, basically luck of the draw, but he will have sustained some brain damage. And people are just watching him slur his words and go, oh, he's always just been weird. And you're like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And then other people were like jumping out to tell me, well, when he beats Chiesa, you'll be eating your words. And I'll be, no, I won't. Alistair Overeem and Andrei Arlovski still win fights. Doesn't mean that they haven't taken a fucking ton of concussions. There's this retarded notion in fight sports that if you're still winning, you're not unhealthy. Imagine how badly John Jones would kick the ass of, I don't know, Misha Serkinov, even if you cut out his front lobes. You can be a shambling mess of what you were and still a better fighter than someone who's in their prime or still in their, fighting shape. It's your brain, it's not your fighting ability. But anyway, and then the other piece of news, Gegard Mousasi held off for about a week and then started bitching about how Rafael Levata was on PEDs. Now, this is hilarious because people have come out and been like, well, I think you'll find that everyone who's accused of being on PEDs, which is everyone he's ever lost to, has been caught at some point. Jacare hasn't. And then he accused Machida of using steroids. Well, the Machida one's doubly funny because Machida got caught for like a dietary supplement, which he then immediately turned himself in for, not realising that it was a banned substance, learning it was a banned substance, telling them I don't think they even caught him on the test. It was like a Crocop situation. And then they suspended him for 2 years in what is widely accepted to be a ridiculous use of their authority. But more than that, he accused Machida of using drugs almost immediately after he lost to Machida, when he said Machida looked like a 15-year-old boy, but also he's on steroids, and also he was greased. And then the grease thing is completely baseless. You can look, it's very hard to get away with greasing, because you are felt by like multiple officials before you get in the ring. They have that, whatever it is, sponsored by so-and-so touchdown zone where they get like felt up. And then the ref feels you between rounds. If you ever look too sweaty, they're going to wipe you down. Some dudes just get sweaty and they're wiped down anyway. But, remember the George St. Pierre versus BJ Penn greasing scandal. That was because the coach rubbed some Vaseline in his corner on his shoulders and neck. And we saw it all happen on camera. You have to do it in the ring to get away with it. There's nothing of that in the Machida fight. Gegard Mousasi is just a bitter loser. He's always been that way. And he didn't say a word about this beforehand. He was like, when he left for Bellator, he was like, Scott Coker has given me his confirmation that we'll be doing testing, more testing against my opponents on a case-by-case basis. Didn't once in the press conferences say, I reckon Lovato's on the roids. I reckon we need to test him. He went to this organisation with less testing and then cried because he was fighting a roidy dude, and then he only cried afterwards too. And side note, Rafael Lovato caught for nothing. Gegard Mousasi caught for actually holding the fence in the fight several times to stop himself being taken down. So the worst fan base in the world just got a little bit worse with their leader's permission. That's what that's about. Now Lovato has to give him a rematch, and then when Gegard Mousasi loses, people will say, well, he was past his prime and also he hasn't been motivated to fight for years. For someone who's not motivated to fight, he sure makes a lot of excuses. That's like my favourite thing about Anderson Silva. Oh, he's not really been motivated to fight for years, he's just having fun. Why does he take all the drugs then? Anyway, let's move on. Let's do some fight previews. Who's on this card? Well, I'll tell you who's not on this card. Fucking Sean O'Malley, been pulled from that fight with Marlon Vera for yet another instance of pulsing. Man, I just checked this bottom of this tap-out page. Do you remember when they were talking about John Jones versus Stipe for this fight? Anyway, I'm glad they didn't do that because Thiago Santos definitely is a more compelling fight. But we got Panini Clanzad from Sweden, who I've never heard of, versus Julia Vila. Let's skip up through this. Jack Marshman's on the card. God damn, that Battle of Wales was so boring. Jack Marshman versus whoever that other lad was. Now we're talking. Alejandro Perez versus Song Yadong. I love me some Yadong. Very fun Chinese guy. Obviously, all the Chinese fighters love to open with side kicks and shit like that. They throw those occasionally. But he's got decent hands, cuts the ring decently, and he's been working with Team Alpha Male, so his wrestling's getting much better. On a great streak of wins, Alejandro Perez just coming off that decision loss to Cody Stamen, back in, that's a part of a plant, isn't it? Back in March, but before that he'd beaten Eddie Wineland, Matthew Lopez, Yuri Alcantara. So yeah, he's in a pretty good place. Nice test for Yadong. How do you test Yadong? Pop it in the comments down below. Claudia Gadelha, quite far down the card against Random Marcus. I swear this fight has happened already, but Claudia Gadelha we're finally getting to the stage where Claudia Gadelha's outright refusal to work on her conditioning / fight in the right weight class is finally coming back to bite her in the arse. The Carla Esparza one was the one where people actually finally caught up with the fact that she's a one-round fighter. She lost to Jessica Andrade by doing well in the first round and then gassing. She won the Carla Esparza one, but it was a split decision, and a lot of people felt Esparza won, which was weird because Esparza, we all assumed she was pretty washed. And then she lost the fight to Nina Ansaroff. Oh, more excuses came out about Nina Ansaroff this week, which apparently she had a throat infection for her last fight. But, whatever. Anyway, Random Marcus coming off the win off Angela Hill. Nice, easy round one armbar. Again, lost to Nina Ansaroff. She had that weird draw with Marina Rodriguez, but sort of like a middle-of-the-pack lass. She's got some good grappling, but, how's that going to hold up with Claudia Gadelha's power and strength in the clinch? Gadelha's hard to watch because I think if she could extend her performances through 3 rounds, I think she'd be a really interesting fighter to watch, and I think she'd finish these people anyway. It's like that thing where if you hunt for the knockout and you don't get it in the first round, you're going to gas out, whereas if you just try and win all the exchanges and you're throwing with decent power, the other guy's going to fall down eventually anyway. I think if Gadelha just prepared for fucking 3-5 round performances or whatever she's in at the time, she'd have a lot more success. Well, this is like we talk about John Jones in the main event. Like, he's an amazing finisher, but what he does is he sets himself up to fight the same way for 5 rounds, and then if you're hurt, he'll pick up the pace. But he's always there planning to go the full 5. Marlon Vera's here. He is smarting from that loss of the Sean O'Malley fight. He's got a last-minute replacement. I think he's been fucked around a couple of times now, hasn't he? Yeah, no, it was back in March, actually. He was scheduled to fight Thomas Almeida. Great fight. Fell through when Almeida got injured. Scheduled to fight Frankie Saenz, and then Vera got ill. He had that fight with Frankie Saenz, won it by knockout in the first round, and now he's just had this fight with O'Malley pulled out from under him as well. So he's fighting a guy called Nohelin Hernandez, who 10-2, decent record, but very much a regional guy. He's been fighting at Tai Chi Palace, and his last bout featured on Tapology as a boxing loss, and he had both another boxing match and a fight with Anthony Burchak in LFA booked, and then he got called up to take this fight. Good old Ed Soares and his boys probably sorting that out. Anyway, I'm afraid I don't know much about his opponent. I do enjoy Chito Vera. Actually, is he fighting out of Jackson Wink? He's from Albuquerque. There you go. So they've got another one. Then your feature prelim is a bit of a strange one. The return of Gilbert Melendez against Arnold Allen. Now, Arnold Allen is super legit. He's a rising talent. Maybe he's not on the level that Gilbert Melendez was when he left, but Gilbert Melendez had been on a bad slump for a good old while. The pinnacle of like Gilbert Melendez's popularity and success obviously came in Strikeforce, but it was like before the last Strikeforce title defense, which was against Josh Thompson. He had a match with Shinya Aoki where Shinya Aoki couldn't touch him. He had a fight with Tatsuya Kawajiri where he absolutely obliterated him with elbows, which were only made legal like an hour before the fight or something like that. And then he fought Jorge Masvidal, who was already well regarded, but Jorge Masvidal's problem has always been like doing enough. This is still a problem with him today. You watch him and you go, damn, he's really defensively sound. He doesn't get hit a lot, really defends a takedown well. That's the kind of guy that you'd love to copy your defense or base your defense around what he does. And then basically Gilbert Melendez just threw 1-2-1-2 at him over and over again, like in 4-punch rallies, and Masvidal didn't do anything about it. But that was like the peak of Gilbert Melendez, and everyone was like, want to see Gilbert Melendez versus Eddie Alvarez, because Eddie Alvarez was the Bellator champion around the same time. Gets to the UFC, fights Benson Henderson in a losing effort for the title, but it was a Benson Henderson fight. Benson Henderson can fight anyone in the world and go to a split decision. Like he will fight the best fighters in the world and go to a competitive split decision, but he'll also let guys who just shouldn't be there get into a split decision with him. He was there in that sort of phase of his career. Love Benson, love him, but I think that was the one that I helped him scout. I helped him scout Melendez for that, but. He came within inches of winning the lightweight title, and then he has this tune-up against Diego Sanchez. And Diego Sanchez, chin up in the air, swings right uppercut, left straight, over and over again, because that's his game. And Melendez gets in a swinging match with him and gets knocked down. And that's, where he starts looking bad. They booked him to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. I completely forgot about that, but that was back in 2014. Then he fights Anthony Pettis, and that was another title fight. Just got... his thing was like, I'm going to push Anthony Pettis to the fence. Didn't really work. Got hit with a nice jumping back kick, intercepting counter while he was trying to do it. And he got guillotined. Fights Eddie Alvarez, loses a close, boring decision. That was when Eddie Alvarez was like desperate to get back in the win column. That was like a year after people really wanted that champion versus champion fight. And it was just such a wet fart. Then he fights Edson Barbosa and loses, and that was Edson Barbosa started to build up a tear because Edson Barbosa then fought Anthony Pettis and smashed him. Fights Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens just obliterates him, and he hasn't fought since. That was back in 2017. The Edson Barbosa fight was in 2016, and the Eddie Alvarez fight was 2015. So really inactive for like the last 3 years of his career, and now he's been out for almost 2. Oh, and there was a positive drug test in there at some point, which is always hilarious because Nate Diaz and Nick Diaz are always shouting about people using performance-enhancing drugs while standing next to Jake Shields and Gilbert Melendez, who have both used performance-enhancing drugs, or been caught using them, which is even more embarrassing. But Arnold Allen, obviously, super stoked everyone is on him, and he got that win over Jordan Rinaldi in his last fight. I think they cut Rinaldi after that, didn't they? But before that, the previous fight... Oh man, they actually booked the Gilbert Melendez fight before this, and Gilbert Melendez got injured. But before that, he fought Mads Burnell. Now, this is going to be a little tangent where I just talk about how great Mads Burnell is. You know how great Mads Burnell is because I talk about it quite a lot. I talked about it heavily last episode because he won the Cage Warriors title. Mads Burnell brought this really interesting boxing style out, kept taking him down with doubles, gets a bit complacent in the last round, winning the fight. And Arnold Allen snaps up the ninja choke, the power guillotine, whatever you want to call it, front sleeper, which is a nice one when the guy's on your leg along the fence. You just you make sure that your arm's down in front of him. Carlos Condit used to go to it too. And there's a guy who got famous for it, and that's why it's called the ninja choke, but I can't remember who it was because it was a Shuto guy. But the interesting thing about that fight is that Arnold Allen's very highly touted on his kickboxing, awkward southpaw kickboxer, and Masvidal just came out and tooled him up on the feet. Basically, he was moving his headlots. He kept slipping this short right hand down the center while slipping to the outside of the lead shoulder, getting past Arnold's lead hand, and then he just dropped straight on the double. Worked really nicely. I just can't see. Well, to be honest, I can see this going one of two ways. Gilbert Melendez comes back, surprises the young prospect, and everyone goes, damn, Gilbert Melendez has still got it. Or Gilbert Melendez comes back, loses, and basically however he loses, we're all going to be like, I'm not sure he still had it. You know, it was the way he went out was so, he wasn't stopped, but it was that Stevens fight was so one-sided. He was basically on the verge of being it was one of those ones where if Jeremy Stevens had just insisted he stand up a bit more every time he went down from being kicked in the calf, it might have been a stoppage. Then you got Chiesa versus Diego Sanchez. It's an interesting fight. It's one of those ones that people like because at least Sanchez shouldn't get hit too much. But the way these things work, it's never quite like that. It's like when they booked Kazushi Sakuraba versus Shinya Aoki, and you were like, well, they'll probably have a gentleman's agreement to just grapple. Shinya Aoki takes him down, gets on top, and just punches him like 500 times in the head because it's a fight. You're not going to risk it on a gentleman's agreement. Also, Diego Sanchez doesn't get that everyone just wants to see him grapple. You know, he's still there being like, I want to be in wars, even though everyone else is like, I want to see Diego fight exclusively grapplers now, please. Can we have Diego Sanchez versus Damian Maia? So, you know, Diego's going to come in swinging. It depends what Michael Chiesa can do. You know, he was having a lot of trouble making that lightweight limit, and he wasn't taking the shots the best there either, and he lost that one to Pettis, wasn't it? And Kevin Lee. You know, his thing was that he was enormously strong and talented as a grappler at lightweight, but it was, you know, the weight cut was taking such a detriment on him that now he's moving up, but will he be, you know, he won't be the strongest man at welterweight. He won't be the biggest welterweight, where he was almost always the biggest lightweight in the ring. So yeah, that's interesting. I just hope that he doesn't murder Diego. But then we're at that stage now with Diego where we are with almost all the others, where you go, is it worse if he loses a decision and thinks he's competitive and goes, okay, well, I didn't get hurt too badly, let's go again? Or do you want to see him brutally stopped so that at least the people around him will stop feeding into this delusion? And it's not delusion about ability to fight. He can still fight, but he can't fight at the highest level anymore. And he's taken a lot of beatings. He's in a bad shape. Luke Rockhold versus Jan Błachowicz. This should be interesting. I mean, I tweeted the other day, lol, still can't believe Błachowicz lost to Santos. Watch that fight again. They awkwardly trade low kicks out at extreme range. You know, because I was watching this going, well, I remember him low kicking. I remember Santos low kicking Błachowicz a lot, and in the Killing the King, which I wrote this week, which you should definitely read because I haven't written one in 3 years, and I wrote an amazing one on John Jones. But we were talking about counter low kicking, you know, because DC had a great deal of success by retracting his leg from Jones's low kicks or low line straight kicks, and then coming back with a low kick of his own, and he'd always catch Jones out of position. And Jones would like try and dive into a clinch with his feet crossed, and Cormier would just throw him off. So I was going, well, Santos has powerful leg kicks. Maybe he can counter leg kick. And then I watched that fight, and they're just standing at extreme range and then running up and low kicking each other. It's just terrible. And then Jan Błachowicz decides to just run in chin first, and Santos swings with his chin up in the air like he always does. God, watch him against Mousasi, where he just gets punched in the face and then starts. It's like chin up, eyes closed, swing as hard as he can, and then Mousasi takes him down. But just terrible, that fight. He just jumped in and got starched by a guy with much worse boxing than him. Błachowicz is always interesting because, you know, he did some good work against Jimmy Manuwa. He did some good work against Alexander Gustafsson on the feet, and then Gustafsson was like, I'm going to take him down, and we all went, oh, fuck's sake, Jan Błachowicz, weren't you supposed to be a good grappler? I would be very interested to see what Luke Rockhold can do here, because there aren't a lot of light heavyweights who can kick well. That is John Jones's USP, basically. Well, and Dominic Reyes and Johnny Hendricks are the other ones we're excited about, and they can kick fairly decently. But Luke Rockhold is the kind of guy who will punish your body mercilessly. Best when he can like back his man up and go to the fence, and then when they circle to past his lead leg, he goes for like a back kick. When they circle out towards his power hand, he throws the round kick to the body and obliterates them. And if they just stand there, he can get in, lock his hands around him and throw him to the mat and start doing the Luke Rockhold grappling, which we all love. You know, there's always videos of him going up training, and everyone always says, "Hey, did you know that Luke Rockhold could have probably been like one of the few Americans to make it to the finals of the Worlds in BJJ or something like that at black belt, but he just chose not to because he's a fighter now." And every time you're like, that's interesting, and every time he takes someone to the mat in MMA, you go, Jesus Christ, this guy's actually a monster. But now people know about the fact that he's just gonna try and swing a check hook while leaning back. And it's not that he's got a shit chin, it's that he keeps getting hit in this terrible position where Anderson Silva got knocked out, you know. And if you know that that's there and you can back him up, then you can really hurt him. I did like what he was showing against Yoel Romero. He was doing some nice stuff with like triple jabs and mixing in nice side kicks and things like that. And you go, nice, good work, Henry Hooft, because I think he went to work with Hooft for that fight. But it's still like his reaction when push comes to shove is that he'll lean back and try and check hook. And that isn't always a weakness. You know, we were talking about this in Killing the King. We're not looking for weaknesses, we're looking for habits. Because if you do something repeatedly, you can be relied upon to do it. And wherever your hands and chin and body end up in that move, people can start planning for it, you know. Very interested in this one. I suspect, I mean, if Rockhold's smart, actually, I don't even know. I want to see him go to the clinch. I want to see what he can do in the clinch with these bigger dudes. You know, he's been draining himself for years to make middleweight. Let's see what you can do in the clinch. Though it would be nice to see him like jab up, and Błachowicz. If Błachowicz, Błachowicz's problem is that he's kind of skittish and tentative, and it's awkward, is what we'd say. But he's not the kind of guy who's like going to double jab down the center, force you back towards the cage, and crack you as you lean back. He's kind of the guy who's going to be out in the middle of the ring, waving his hands about and throwing awkward inside low kicks that don't really do anything, and then trying to check hook you when you come in. So yeah, don't know what to make of that one, but we'll either decide that Luke Rockhold's done forever or a new force at light heavyweight, depending on the result. Ben Askren versus Jorge Masvidal. In terms of I have no idea what to expect, this is kind of the pinnacle on the card. Well, we do know what to expect from both men. We just don't know what's going to happen when those two things hit each other. Like, you couldn't be more obvious. You couldn't be more obvious than Ben Askren with your intentions, you know. And the interesting thing about Askren is that he's wrestling while people are trying to punch him in the head. And, where everyone else is trying to build their rudimentary kickboxing into their wrestling. So their shoot boxing or whatever Danaher calls it. Ben Askren is still very much trying to high school wrestle people while they punch him. And it's worked so far. And there's big caveats on that because like Luis Sapo stopped him. Who was the other one? Fuck, what's his name? Can't remember. Another big guy in one gave him some trouble. And in his last fight, Robbie Lawler gave him fits. If you watch the Robbie Lawler, and the knees to the body are going to be a huge part. If Askren becomes like world champion or something like that, the Killing the King already will read, post your fucking head on him, get your hips back and knee him in the body. Because Robbie Lawler did that with his back to the fence. I think Askren had double underhooks or something like that, but Lawler, posted his head, got his hips back, slammed a knee in, and Ben Askren immediately decided he didn't want to be in the clinch and backed up. And then went, shit, my whole game was to get to the clinch and had to get back in again. You could really... Good clinch fighters... I don't want to say RDA, but I will say RDA, because there's huge problems with RDA because he has so much trouble with wrestlers, but he is a very good clinch striker. Maybe a Leon Edwards type figure. Someone like that. I feel like they could do horrible things to Ben Askren in the clinch if they just went in with their hands down, ready to stop Ben's shot and keep him in a clinch. Because, he doesn't drive through on all his shots. He doesn't finish the shots instantly. His whole thing is chaining things together, working cleverly. And he will be drawn up into clinches as a result of that. I think it'd be very interesting to see what Leon Edwards could do against him. Jorge Masvidal is fascinating because he's very hard to take down. Been working with Colby Covington for years. Has always been hard to take down, and has a really weird stand-up style too, where he's almost like on one leg. He's got that weird sort of Thai floating lead leg, but relies heavily on his jab. He's a very peculiar fighter, And I like that a lot about him. I think there's too many guys who are just trying to be like the standard, and he's from very early on in his career, he's been like, no, I do this weird shit, and this is what I do. I have no idea how that's going to hold up against Askren, who's just going to be diving after one leg. Askren shoots like low singles if he gets in trouble. He's just like, I'm going to dive from across the ring at your ankle, and then just cling to you. Masvidal was very competitive in the Maia fight. That was a good even back and forth, and he stopped Maia from doing a lot of what he wanted to do. But those are two very different types of grapplers. Damian Maia is trying to finesse his way onto your back while using some strength. Granted, it's not all technique. There's a good deal of strength involved in jiu-jitsu, but he's trying to either get the single leg and then hope you turn your back while he's guard passing you, or get your back straight off the fence. Ben Askren is just trying to drag you down at all costs and then maybe hold on to a wrist and hit you. I think Ben Askren, when all is said and done, I'm going to look back at him and say, oh my God, I think we're all going to do this. We're going to look back and go, oh my God, I wish, how good would Ben Askren have been if he learned X and Y? And I think one of my main things is going to be like, how good would Ben Askren be if he learned to dirty box? Because he can get a hold of anyone. It's the finishing the takedowns that he's had trouble with, like guys like Sapo and stuff like that, and Lawler. How good would he be if he could just land some corking short uppercuts off that, or elbows, or knees, and things like that? But he doesn't. He's absolutely honest, and I respect that a lot. He's just like, there is no trickery going on here. I am going to take you down, or try. And he's kind of a cool guy, because, he was kind of annoying when he hadn't really fought anyone, but you got to, even though the Lawler result was kind of sketchy, you got to respect that he did do that. And also, he got fucked up in the first half of that fight, and he was so many guys would have been like, fucking hell, maybe I'm not cut out for this in the UFC at that moment. Like a Hector Lombard or someone like that would have mentally folded. And Ben Askren was like, oh, my face is all over the canvas. I better get up and try and take him down again. Plus, he's just goofy as fuck. He wears flip-flops everywhere. He's world-ranked in disc golf or disc hockey or whatever it's called. Frisbee golf, that's the one. And the stare down for this fight, because Jorge Masvidal, everyone's on this trip where he's like the coolest guy on earth. And he does have a very cool voice. And he seems like a chill guy. But Jorge Masvidal is cool if you've seen Scarface long enough ago that you've forgotten it, and then you're like, oh, that was pretty cool, actually. So that's where we're at with Jorge Masvidal. But on the stage for the stare downs, Ben Askren's just like, why you mad, bro? Jorge Masvidal can't just be like, He has to go, I'm not mad. And you're like, where were you all through school, man? This is the easiest thing in the world to diffuse, and you're falling right into it. So they just go back and forward. But you're mad, though, bro. Why are you mad? I can see you're mad, bro. And Jorge Masvidal's like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. And as Ben Askren's walking off the stage, he's still like, no, I'm not. Just so childish, but hilarious nonetheless. And the other thing I was going to say about Askren that leads me to suspect he's a cool guy is that, well, firstly, all these guys who are wrestlers do tons of work with kids for nothing. It's a thankless sport. DC still coaches a load of kids just because of his love of wrestling. And Ben Askren has, trained with Jordan Burroughs. He knew exactly how good Jordan Burroughs was, and he still set up that super fight and was all like, I'm going to take down Jordan Burroughs. And then Jordan Burroughs basically humiliated him in a wrestling context, and he didn't care because he got a lot of eyes on a charity and on the sport of wrestling. That was a wrestling pay-per-view. When the fuck? Well, I mean, you get wrestling pay-per-views every month, but an amateur wrestling pay-per-view, that's crazy. Anyway, co-main event time. Amanda Nunes versus Holly Holm. Wrote an article about this. Go check it out at Unibet. / check the fight primer. Click through to Unibet because I can't link it here because YouTube's a bitch. I think this is more interesting than the main event because Holly Holm is awkward, and Amanda Nunes' weakness has historically been her cardio. Against Zingano she gassed hard. In the first Shevchenko fight she gassed hard, and that was another one that made me think like, I don't know if you remember this. When I first saw Shevchenko, I think I first saw her in a first Nunes fight, and I went back and watched the Kaufman fight, and I was like, I'm pretty hot on this lass. But I said from the start, she doesn't do enough. It's like Jorge Masvidal, it's like all those other guys who just can't push their advantages. And she had Nunes gassing in the third round and towards the end of the second round, and she really didn't do enough with it. And then in the second fight between the two, it's like she came out prepared to take it to Nunes in the fourth and fifth round, but didn't do enough to actually get her tired. Guys, everyone's working on their conditioning, but guys who are famous for gassing that out, and everyone will eventually, no one does what is it, Benson Henderson called it a 5-round controlled explosion. No one actually does that. People take breaks even if they're winning and they go 5 rounds hard. But the thing is, you've got to get him working. You can't just sit back and go, well, he will automatically get tired in the 5th round if all he's done is like lightly shadow box. Or she, in this case. I think Holm's problem here will be similar to the problem in the Cyborg fight, where she constantly circles to her left, comes in with that left straight, and then gets hit with the counter immediately after it. She always lands the left straight, and then he gets hit with the counter. And then she just started panicking against Cyborg, and never actually showed another look. It was just constantly circling around to her left, and then bouncing back with the left straight. When she did well was when she did it straight into the clinch. So you bounce to your left, throw the left straight, immediately dig underhooks. Because she was surprisingly good in the clinch against Cyborg. That was the big worry. She's been training for Cyborg, Ronda Rousey, all these other grapplers she's fought. She's been working so hard on, stop them in the clinch. And it turns out Holly Holm is incredibly strong in the weight class. Both weight classes. It's featherweight. She's a fucking strong featherweight. But she's strong enough to stop the best in the world in the clinch. And she's never used it to, offensive means. So it was quite nice when she turned up and just wrestle-fucked Megan Anderson. At least promising. Because, if you can make Amanda Nunes' problem used to be getting taken down. They'd go, oh, she's a brown belt in judo, and then she'd get taken down and get tired that way. So if Holly Holm could actually do that and make her, circle out, land the left straights, get into the clinch, because if you throw the left straight and you punch and clutch, that's your best chance of not getting hit with one of those horrible Amanda Nunes bombs that just turn people's lights off. The other nice thing about this fight is that Amanda Nunes' calf kick that she fucking loves is not as readily there, because Holly Holm's a southpaw, so a lot of the time you're kicking into the shin. But I'm very interested to see this, because Amanda Nunes is pretty meat and potatoes as a fighter. Her thing is that she's a woman with monstrous power, and there aren't a lot of those about. But really, it's just the low kick. She's got decent counters occasionally, but I've only really seen her do it against people like Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate. So you don't know how that's going to play out against Holly Holm, even though Holly Holm... Well, I don't want to... I won't get into how bad women's boxing is compared to men's boxing, but Holly Holm used to being counterpunched, or counterpunched at least. So, it's a more interesting co-main than it looks on paper, in my mind. And certainly when you look at Holly Holm's record in her last 6, which is 2-4, you're like, you don't really deserve the title shot. But equally, look at these divisions. At least she's interesting. And, I got asked to write this preview this week, and they said, do the Jones fight and the Holm fight. And I was like, well, we know who's the star there. Holly Holm still has that residual fame from knocking out Ronda Rousey, because she was the first to do it. And Amanda Nunes has some fame from it, but Holly Holm had already been the one who broke through and stopped that cultural phenomenon. And then John Jones versus Thiago Santos. I talked about this a lot, but go read The Killing the King, because I put a ton of effort into that this week, which is why this podcast's so late. It's about 3,500 words or something like that. It's a long old piece, but it just breaks down everything we know about John Jones, particularly with regards to his 2 rivalries. The guys who did well with him in one fight and then lost the other, or did well in both fights and lost. But Daniel Cormier and Alexander Gustafsson both had good performances with him, both had good moments against him, even in their losing performances. Well, both of them lost both performances, but those are the 2 guys who told us a lot about John Jones by pushing him past his A-game. We're always talking about this in Killing the King. It's not about finding a magic button that you can just press and knock this guy out. That they're a world champion probably doesn't exist. It's about making the thing that they do 90% of the time harder to do. And then they have to do the things that they don't do all the time. They have to do something else, and they go to their B game. And when you fight in your B game, it's a little bit less comfortable. Think George St. Pierre when Johnny Hendricks took away his jab, or Anderson Silva fighting on the lead. Take away John Jones's straight kicks. There's loads of ways to do that. You can do that by walking him down and pulling the lead leg away, as Daniel Cormier did while hand fighting with him. Worked beautifully. You can fight him at distance. Now, see, that's the interesting one about the Gustafsson fight, and I said this in the article. I'm just going to keep plugging the article. You should probably read the article. But the Gustafsson fights are interesting because in the first fight, Gustafsson moves laterally the whole fight. And that's because he's getting Jones walking forwards. You can't take angles on people while you're pursuing them as effectively. When they do the second fight, John Jones is moving away from Gustafsson the entire time. So Gustafsson has to, bring him back in front of him, and then he's not moving off to an angle. He's just playing catch-up the whole time, and Jon Jones is punting him in the liver every time he catches up. And also by circling offline like that, constantly breaking the line of attack, like Valentina Shevchenko did against Jessica Rai. Positive Valentina Shevchenko reference there for you nerds. But by breaking that line constantly, circling back into the left, Jones was also able to stop Gustafsson from firing combinations, which is where he was getting caught out in the first fight. Because when Jon Jones gets into boxing range, he reaches for people, and that's when he can get caught with like left hooks and things. Both Gustafsson and Cormier caught him by hooking off the jab. You jab at Jon Jones, his right hand comes all the way out to palm it, and then you go around the side. Except he's protected a lot by quite a deal by his height. Same way Curtis Millender is. Both those guys really reach for straight punches, but because they're quite tall and long, they're at a longer distance, typically, so it's harder to get in on them with swings, even though there is that massive opening there. The other thing that Jones did against Gustafsson, and I think it's going to be, it's a big deal against every striker that he faces, is that he'll walk them forwards by circling the cage, and then he'll duck in on them. And he doesn't care if he gets an actual takedown. He ducks in, and if you saw the Gustafsson fight, he throws the arm wide, and they dig an underhook, and he posts his head on their shoulder as he comes up, and starts trying to get their elbow past his body line so that he can do that shoulder crank. And he's not looking for a submission, he's looking to hurt your arm. And not to like break your arm so that you can't fight anymore, but just to hurt it. Like if you've twisted an ankle while you're rolling or something like that, and you've kept rolling, or if you've done it at a competition or something like that, if you get bruising or swelling around any joint when you're fighting, it makes it a lot harder. So from the get-go against Gustafsson, he did that twice. He shot in, came up, cranked his arm. So if you watch DC in the second fight against Jones, because he'd had his arm cranked, every time Jones ducks in for a clinch, DC stuffs him with an underhook, and then he immediately pulls his arms back short again. He's really cautious about letting Jones have, the elbow past his body while also the underhook is in there. He keeps his arms very short for a lot of that fight. And that's really what Jon Jones does. There's only those two things, extreme distance striking and the clinch. And if you ever get into that comfortable range where you can box, you can swing at his head, he will duck into the clinch. The problem is Thiago Santos has shown almost nothing of scientific striking. He does some cool capoeira stuff, but he takes a huge run up for it. It's not very well hidden. Consider he's had some impressive ones, like when he knocked out Jack Hermansson, singing, dancing Jack Hermansson. But again, it was just like throw a really hard kick and then run in swinging with your chin up in the air. He's powerful, but he doesn't often have that like one punch power. And the other thing that I really noticed about his light heavyweight career is that he's much slower. So if your idea was to get in and wheel kick this dude who's always moving, it doesn't help being 30 pounds heavier or whatever. But anyway, read the articles. I've done a preview on the fight itself at Unibet, and I've done the Killing the King, which is an independent piece, which you can check out there. Right, I'm going to call it there because I want to get this up before the actual fucking fights start. If you want to get in on the Patreon or support the podcast or the independent stuff like the Killing the King that I've just put up, sign up to the Patreon. We've got a Cyril Gahn piece dropping over the weekend, which I've had in the works for a while. If you want to see what I'm writing at any time, including those 2 Unibet pieces, check out thefightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. How good would it be if Thiago Santos actually won? Bless.